O nosso próximo convidado é Koen Geens. É atualmente membro do Federal Parliament, onde se foca em temas de justiça. Em 2019-2020 foi Deputy Prime Minister e foi ainda Ministro das Finanças, da Justiça e dos Assuntos Europeus na Bélgica entre 2013 e 2020. No contexto que nos traz aqui hoje, foi responsável pela inauguração da primeira Casa de Transição na Bélgica, uma casa de pequena dimensão, onde as pessoas reclusas podem cumprir a parte final das suas penas e onde podem trabalhar intensamente, como diz o nosso convidado, na sua reintegração na sociedade. Koen Geens vai estar à conversa com Gonçalo Noronha de Andrade, que para além de ser atualmente membro da direção da RESHAPE, foi também um dos seus membros fundadores. O Gonçalo representa a RESHAPE no board do RESCALED, que é um movimento europeu, nascido na Bélgica, que também tem uma visão alternativa para o sistema prisional europeu e que se foca em 3 pilares essenciais. Por um lado, pequena escala, por outro, diferenciação e um terceiro de integração na comunidade. E, portanto, nós vamos começar a falar neste tópico durante esta conversa e vamos continuar no painel seguinte. Portanto, eu chamo então a palco Koen Geens e Gonçalo Noronha de Andrade e pedia-vos só para tentarem falar devagarinho, tendo em conta os nossos tradutores. Muito obrigada. Koen Geens, Gonçalo Noronha de Andrade.
We knew each other yesterday, but Koen is fine for me to stay this close, following from the previous panel, so thanks for that. Yeah. Let me just add a few points of introduction while I was reading about Koen. And this is coming from someone who studied the same thing as Koen, but has achieved 1% of what Koen has done throughout the years. So I speak with frustration when I say the following. 1980 was a great year for both of us. I was born, and Koen finalized his degree with distinction in law. He then had a long scientific and academic career with many positions, many faculties, research. He revolutionized the education system in many ways. He introduced reforms in the way of teaching, in the way of bringing up new subjects to the law degree, who is in much need of refreshment, as everybody acknowledges. And he had a life, if you want, before the life that culminated with him being the promoter and the supervisor of the topic that brings us here, which is small detention as a model for imprisonment. So I thought I was reading about many people, but it was only one when I was. Koen was also very gracious to allow me to address him by his name, which speaks about another thing that I want to say. Koen is also the founder of one of the main, the largest and most reputed independent Belgian law firms, which being a lawyer as well, is a good example of the good there can be in lawyers. So I'm only allowed to say this because I am one. So I thank you for what you do for the profession as well in terms of reputation. Before we actually delve into the topic, just to stress, there will be the opportunity to put in some questions if you want. We'll follow the same model. You have the link, so you can use that. And I'll try to filter those to Koen. First question before we actually go into the topic. When you chose law, were you aware of everything that was coming in your career?
Well, I had 2 parents that were teaching languages, and I absolutely wanted to be a language teacher. And then the director of my school said, if you become a language teacher, that school won't survive for a very long time. You want to change society, so study law. And that's what I did. And I didn't regret it, but I still prefer languages to law.
And were you minded of being a lawyer or actually being someone within the system and trying to
I wanted to change the system from within, as our friend Koen said, but it is very difficult. So I only succeeded for a very, very small part. Yeah.
Okay. The political career, also another point of biography. So you've heard that Koen was a former finance minister and a justice minister, the two relevant positions if you want to implement change in the prison system. So the justice minister would have had to go to the finance minister to ask for funding for the changes. So it was very convenient that you knew the position beforehand. But also, Koen was appointed by King Philip to try to arrange a coalition government. You may remember that Belgium was for a large period without a government in place due to a breakup in the coalition. So King Philip was also a fan of Koen and entrusted him with what was by then, I guess, the nation's most important mission. So this is to say, throughout the years, you seem to have hopped on from all the relevant angles to what is needed to implement change, such as small detention. With this, a question finally from me. Can you just try to explain the circumstances in which that change came about? What was the driver? I mean, if there's any war story, how things were implemented, but please do guide us through the process of implementing the first small detention.
Well, as many people here in the room, of course, I only visited prisons before as a young lawyer, and I was not very well acquainted with the prison system when I became Minister of Justice. Now, there are two ways to go about the story of imprisonment. That is, of course, first and most important, the emotional story. And it's that what we hear to a large extent this morning, and which is the most appealing and the most important driver in order to obtain change. So don't let us underestimate the emotional moment you have to endure when you get into a classical prison. The second idea, and it's that what drove me towards small houses, is of course a more rational thing. That is, in our society, about everybody gets these days a second and a third chance. If you have a breakup of your marriage, you get an easy divorce. If you don't study well, you get another degree or another chance. If you go bankrupt, you can start all over again, what you could not do 30 years ago. The strange thing is that there we were much more mild 30, 40 years with regard to prisoners. Today, giving them a second chance has become much more difficult. And that's a strange paradox. Is it because we are so keen and soft on our children that we are so harsh on our prisoners? I don't know. I don't understand. That was the thing that was appealing to me. And I said, listen, we take prison as a given. That's also the point of view this morning, to some extent. We take it as a given. As we took 250 years ago death penalty as a given. But it is not a given. Prison is just a transition towards another form of going about people that do things that are regarded by us as wrong. Not that they are not to be corrected. The question is always, is prison the best way to do it? And then there's another thing we should realize when we think about imprisonment, that is, what is its goal? And the goal seems to be safety. That's what I heard this morning also with some irony. It's safety. But if you put people in prison for 20 years and then let them go without being sure that you've improved them, what has that to do with safety? Because 20 years later they get out of prison, and as we heard, they're not sure at all that they are adapted to the climate of society. The basic mistake historically, and I'm sorry to be teaching, but I'm a teacher. The basic mistake historically is, of course, that in the 19th century, we absolutely wanted in all the continent and in the United States the rule of law. The rule of law with large palaces of justice, the rule of law with large prisons, neoclassical buildings that gave a very pretentious side of justice and of lady themes in society. It's only in the 20th century that the welfare state came. And justice, by no one, is regarded as part of that welfare state. It's social security, it is healthcare, it is education, but nobody says justice, fairness, equality is a part of the welfare state. It should, because we should take care of those people, whether it is mental health or racism or whatever that gave cause to their wrongdoing at the end of the day. And now I come to the houses, because several of the takers of the initiative of today are Belgian and are considered to be the innovators of the project I finally supported as a minister. I don't know whether it's the right or the correct English term, but detention damage is one of the most important problems we are dealing with these days. If you are for a long time in prison, you have detention damage. The strange thing is that the punishment makes you worse sometimes than you were before. And in first instance, we try with housing in Belgium. We started in 2018 with a new law on transition houses. We have now 2 transition houses. The idea is to make easier the time between the end of punishment and the 18 months before that term, so that you get adapted again on a small scale with the chance of differentiation. You get adapted again to society. You can work, you can go outside. It are houses of about 70 to 20 people. So it is caring about detention damage and taking it away as much as possible before you return to society. And now there is a new initiative, a new minister who also followed the people of the houses, amongst which Hans Klaus, who is here today, one of our most important prison directors. And the new minister said, well, we're going to make detention houses for preventing detention damage, for those that are punished for a short term. And so if you will be punished for a short term, within this and 10 years, in Belgium you will go to a small detention house that is totally different from the classical prison environment, so that you don't incur detention damage. Because if you incur detention damage during a short term of punishment, you risk to take drugs in prison or to learn other bad things you should not have learned. But the idea is all the time, why do people get in prison and why do we want to keep them there? Because they don't necessarily get better by being there. And therefore, the houses in the first instance are a way to do away with that damage. In the long run, I believe that detention houses are a future punishment that might be the most important one, but I invite the whole community of criminologists, because I'm only a lawyer, to think about other ways of punishment, as Beccaria did in the 18th century when he talked of corporal punishment. We should think about other ways of punishing people, and maybe not punishing, but taking care of them, and not taking prison still as a given for the 22nd century. We have to change that. I strongly believe it.
Thank you very much. A few questions coming from that. You mentioned, you started by speaking about the emotional element that if you want, allows momentum to grow and to make the change. But in your summary, there seems to be also a very rational process about judging and weighting the pros and cons. Can you just tell us about the experience, the actual experience as a member of the government in trying to pass a law that foresaw the transition houses? And I mean, the type of dialogue that you establish with your fellow members of parliament or with the opposition. I mean, the political or the legislative process that led to the legal change that allowed the transition. Was that more of an emotional process, or did you need to gain public opinion to have it by your side in order to have the law go through, or or was it more of a very straightforward, rational, look, we have this problem, this is a way to solve it, this is a solution, let's try it?
Well, there are three kind of reactions that are all three important, I think. The first one is that of the interested public opinion and the lawmakers in general. They think, well, that's a nice idea. It's sympathetic. Let's have some empathy for it. It doesn't cost a lot of money. Let's try it. So that's not the difficult part. Also, my colleagues in government, the extreme right, but there were no extreme right colleagues in government, they liked it, and it was for fun. They thought it was an experiment in the beginning, and it didn't cost a lot of money. The second thing is the system. That means the people that are working in prisons and the people that run the prison administration, because they have an enormously difficult task. They have a small budget. They have to take care of, in Belgium, 10 to 11,000 people with 60% old prisons and a very, very difficult political environment that is very critical of everything that might go wrong, like a prisoner that might escape, or like a prisoner that is released too soon and might commit a crime and so on. Those are the people I cared most about, because they have to make the system work. We expect from them miracles. They are not overpaid, and they have a very ungrateful task these days. So they said, we support you, but you have to privatize. We can't do it ourselves. You have to privatize. This has to be for a private exploitant. We can't do it ourselves. And then the third problem, and that's not easy, because you are then subject to all kinds of European legislation in order to give the project to the lowest bidder, and probably it's not always the one that you want to have for public opinion purposes. The third is the local communities. In Belgium, it is extremely difficult these days to make a new prison. We generally build our new prisons now very close to highways, there where nobody wants to live, and where you can grow vegetables or flowers, because it takes you 10 years to have all kinds of legal procedures with the neighbors. That, of course, is multiplied when you go about small houses. Because even if there are only 20 people living in that house, they might escape. They might do wrong things. And so I had a very sympathetic mayor in Mechelen who supported me 100% and who opened together with me, as a minister now of internal affairs in the Flemish government. But for the southern part of the country, I had an enormous problem finding a place to put the new house. And the new minister now is confronted with the same problem. He only is sure of the municipality or the small city where he was the mayor of before. He forced them to accept the detention house. So you have an enormous problem with housing them, because they are dangerous. And I do think that we should take much more effort in convincing local municipalities, local mayors, to do the job and seduce them, even with financial means, with extras, with compensation. I don't know what, but we have to do something about that issue, because it's not very encouraging.
Well, 2 out of 3 is not bad in terms of support. There's one point which I think gives hope, is you're saying this was something quite recent in time, relatively, to 2018, while you were the Justice Minister. Now there is a new minister, which you shadow in your capacity as a Member of Parliament. And in a sense, what you're saying is that the new minister is also pursuing this model. So it seems that it has, in a way, already embedded in the system and is not dependent on one political party which is more sympathetic to the cause, or one person who has been more engaged with the topic. Kind of poking your scholar mind and your experience and just trying to anticipate. Do you think this is a change, that we've reached a point of no return in terms of this model being one of the instruments of the prison system in Belgium? Or do you think it's still such a rough experiment that it could go wrong and backtrack?
Well, in as far as this is still possible these days, we do have a rather left-wing government. And I think that the Minister of Justice at present is a member of the party who is most right-wing in that government. So he's a former student of mine, and I did not expect him to be so enthusiastic about the housing project. So I always am cautious when I'm applauding myself or somebody else. But I'm very happy about what is happening, and I hope so that it is a point of no return. But on the other hand, we have to be cautious because overpopulation is growing. And nobody understands exactly why. It has to do with provisional detention, with later release of prisoners, with later exporting them to their home country. There are a lot of reasons why there is overpopulation. But I hope, because houses are not a solution to overpopulation, I hope we can find other mechanics in order to reduce that overpopulation. And that is in a country that is more and more becoming right-wing as to safety and security. A very difficult issue. And we still have 0.1% of our people in prison. In the United States, it's 1% of the people in prison. So there is a large gap between Belgium and the United States, but it should go down, it should not go up. And when it goes up, houses are not a solution.
That's actually a nice segue to my next question. As a Minister of Justice, you would regularly meet with your peers at a European level. And you've mentioned yesterday at dinner that you also know a few of the Portuguese former ministers. Did you have a sense of yourself as a lunatic in those forums advocating for this? Or is it a subject that is, one, the topic of discussion in those, at least at the European level? I mean, is it a reality? Is it still an idea coming from someone who everybody respects, but it's not anything to do with them? Can you just explain at what point are we in terms of small detention at the political level, at the European level?
Let me first say that the Portuguese ministers, I knew Vitor Gaspar and Francisca van Dunem quite well. They are excellent ministers. They're way above average at the European level, but there is a large distinction between finance, which is a European matter, and justice, which is a national matter, and certainly justice at the level of execution of punishment, which is a national, subnational matter. So discussing about prisons in a European Council of Justice, where everybody speaks his own language and is translated, whereas in the European Council of Finance, everybody speaks English. So there's a large difference. Is not that easy, certainly not in periods of terrorism. Everybody was talking about reintroducing, not in the Council, but should we not reintroduce corporal punishment? Should we not have a state of urgency everywhere in Europe? So it was not the right time at that moment. But there was certainly openness. What I would plead, however, is that Europe is much more open to safety and security issues at the European level. These days, even intelligence, even CIA or whatever, European CIA, Europol, is all still very, very, very national. Whereas we need another atmosphere in order to have good examples, Scandinavian examples, Portuguese examples, translated at a European level. And I fear it's too soon for that. If we can't even integrate on asylum and migration, how could we on things as punishment, which are regarded, moreover, by most lawyers, by most criminal lawyers, by most prosecutors, as a kind of sorting out the garbage and the waste, but they don't care about it. And that's an appeal to criminal lawyers. Please do care about what happens with people after punishment, in prison. Prosecutors visit, judges visit prisons, know what happens to the people you judged about. The same for lawyers. Not only before, but also after they have been punished.
Does the transition houses model that was implemented in Belgium include duties for judges and prosecutors to visit the houses? I mean,
No.
It's one solution and it's detached from the rest of the system?
It is still considered as a prison. So they're not, we call them participants. We do not call them prisoners anymore, but we don't call them patients yet. And it is, of course, a judge, what we call an instruction judge, un juge d'instruction in Belgium, should visit regularly the prison, and the governor should visit regularly the prison, and so the transition houses. But there is no special duty for those who prosecute to visit those transition houses.
Okay. The other question is, in the process that led to the legal change and the implementation of the house, more importantly, how much of it was at a government/parliament level, and how much of it was participated by organizations such as the equivalent of Reshape in Belgium, or Rescaled, or, I mean, how much did you as a government lean in on those type of private initiatives and in order to get the model rolling?
Well, they were certainly the first driver, the first motor of the movement, and their idea was the basis for the government move, and some of those people also were part of our administration, so they certainly participated to a certain extent in the draft of the law and in the draft of the royal decrees. It was voted in Parliament itself, but let's say that probably they would have preferred still some other outcome with regard to who exploited those houses and how it was going to happen. But once more, in first instance, we only could go about a privatization of the initiative.
And as a concept, privatizing security, was it a topic of public discussion, or was it an easy pass through? I mean, in the overall change.
Well, it may be a paradox, but at the same time, I try to introduce the fact that during a strike, there had to be some minimum service according to European standards by our prison guards, because there was no minimum service in Belgium. And in order to get that minimum service done, I had to promise them that they were to remain public and civil servants, and that we would not privatize our regular prison system, which personally I think is a good thing. I do not believe in privatizing our general prison system, because I think then you get people who want as much prisoners as possible, as we see in the United States.
Fair argument. You need to warn me about time, because I'm enjoying the conversation. I think one last question then, because I see this sign repeatedly. It's been 2 years, I think, not from the 2018 change, legal change, but if you want, from the actual house operating. Do you venture in talking about the results yet, or is it too soon to draw conclusions of whether that model proves itself as the right choice?
Well, we had a first evaluation by our Central Council of Prisoners, which is an independent surveillance body governed by Parliament. It was rather positive. It was not extremely positive, but it was rather positive. It focused to some extent on what are the causes for revocal. Do people not stay too long in the transition houses? Now it's on average 6.5 months, which is maybe too long in order to guarantee that they go back to society. I think there was also, at the level of the prison administration, an evaluation, and that they are, on the basis of the report of the Central Prison Guard, now preparing maybe some changes in the legislation. But on general, it is considered as a positive experience. And so the pilot experiment is prolonged and will be extended to other kinds of detention houses.
Thank you. We have more questions than time to pose them all, so I have to do a tough role, which is choosing. I'll ask one which I've enjoyed reading. Mr. Geens, you said you didn't do everything you wanted. You only did a small part of the job. What else would you have done if you had the opportunity, or if you still have the opportunity as a member of parliament?
Well, I lost my heart, in fact, to the part of criminal justice in the job of a Minister of Justice. It's also the only part where public opinion cares about. I was able to redesign most of the commercial and the civil law. And I did a lot about criminal law, but the most important things about criminal law were impossible to change. The prison system is only one of them. What means that we are unbelievably true and loyal to the system established by Napoleon, which was revolutionary in the beginning of the 19th century with regard to prisons and with regard to criminal law in Belgium. Which means that, in general, you have 3 to 4 years of procedure before somebody gets convicted by a Belgian criminal court. If you look to what happens in the Scandinavian countries, or in Germany, or in the Netherlands, you have at most 1 year. So and it is unbelievable how static that system is, and it was a source of enormous frustration. And I don't think that another term of 6 years, normally it's 4, but we had a lot of problems, so I had to stay for 6 years, that another term of 6 years would allow me to change it. It is unbelievable how conservative those people are. So criminology, please help us.
Right appeal. One final question. Did you get feedback from any participants that went through the transition houses? I mean, were you privy to any feedback about the experience, and can you share it?
Well, I was informed by the general director of the prison administration that he was quite happy about what happened, and I got some written feedback. I cannot tell a lot about it, but they're taking it extremely serious, and I hope we had a problem in one of the 2 houses, which I can't tell a lot about, but it was a problem of aggression, which was quite delicate. So it is not 100% a success, because it has to be encouraged by the local stakeholders to a very large extent. But the experiment in Mechelen, which is a quite important city, which was the center of Europe once, before Spain became the center of Europe, it works very well there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much all for your questions. As someone who could have been your student or your trainee lawyer, thank you very much. Fascinating conversation. Please, a warm applause to Mr. Koen Geens.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.